Thank you very much, Barry. And may I first begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and to thank you very much for the opportunity to come at a very timely point, I think, in some big public policy debates and very public debates. I think if you are an avid reader of the Sunday papers, you certainly would think that we have a major crisis in Australia, not only on the budget front, but also in terms of our welfare system. And that the system is full of people who are dole bludgers, sitting on the couch, lazy, plenty of jobs out there, and the major problem is we just need to get people active. So this afternoon, I wanted to bring a slightly more considered view, if I may say. And I wanted to draw a little bit on some of the important work that I think the OECD has done in what we are widely now talking about, the challenge of inequality, both in developed and developed countries, and the need for us to pursue economic growth in an inclusive way. And I do think that, as you know, Australia is the president of the G20 this year. I have the privilege of being involved in the civil society process. I'm the deputy chair of the C20 steering committee. And I seize the opportunity to also be the chair of the infrastructure agenda. So if I find a little bit of time, I might want to pop in a few comments about that. But I think it is useful for us to firstly just have a quick look. I know that Angel Gurria this morning gave you a bit of a taste of what the OECD is saying about a good policy framework for pursuing inclusive growth. So inclusive growth in its essence says, yes, economic growth is important, but we need to have good policies in place to ensure that it doesn't just end up with rich people getting richer and everybody else being left behind. And I wanted to particularly touch this afternoon on a few of the key elements. In the broad headings, it's about human capital, business and entrepreneurship, local strategies, which is a very common theme emerging, I think, in the Australian context. And importantly, I think some of this, if you were here this morning, my question to the Treasurer about partnership work on public policy, and I want to conclude a little bit with some more on that theme. The truth is that despite the rhetoric and the avid interest of the Sunday papers in the welfare system, we are one of the lowest spending when it comes to cash payments, the redistribution process that Barry talks about in the OECD. So we're down there at number 3 from the bottom when it comes to cash payments out to individuals and households under the overall transfer welfare system. Most of the public focus, certainly from the current government and to some extent from the previous government, has focused on what we call the working age payment system, which is a part of this process. Particularly people who are unemployed, single parents, people with disability, and you would certainly think that that is where the major pressure point is when it comes to real growth in the welfare system. The truth is, I'd love us to work with a few more facts. The truth is that the major real growth when it comes to the transfer payments and the overall budget setting, the real growth is up this end when it comes to the retirement income system and the age pension and the health system. These are the areas of major real growth. When it comes to the working age payment system, so right down the bottom there, we've got family payments and then we've got unemployment benefits, both of which have been very much in the spotlight. Both of those are either falling in real growth terms or only slightly increasing. And when you look, this little graph is the one that shows the trend proportionate to the increase in the population of the number of people who are relying on working age payments, income support payments. So we don't have a crisis at all, and in fact, in many respects, we are a success story when it comes to our efforts to provide a real opportunity for people of working age who would like to be and who should be participating in the labour market. The major structural problem with this system, in our view, is that, as you heard Ross Garno talk earlier, whilst overall the Australian population has frankly never had it better than right now in terms of real income growth, there is a core group of people for whom they have been seriously falling behind when it comes to relative income. It is an indictment on us that, given that we are one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and Credit Suisse says that we have the highest median household wealth of any nation in the globe, that we have over 2 million people who are living below the poverty line and almost 600,000 children. And one of the core reasons for that is that in the welfare payment, our important social safety net that we should be proud of and want to defend and sustain, that successively over the last decade in particular, government policy, budget night after budget night, has moved more and more people off the higher pensions, so the disability support pension, the supporting parent pension, onto the much lower allowances, the New Start allowance and the youth allowance. And the gap between these two payments in income level now has grown to an extraordinary over $160 per week. So you will remember when the Labor government moved a whole group of single parents, once their child turned 8, onto the unemployment payment. Those single parent households, and we know that single parent households have one of the highest rates of poverty amongst them, those single parent households took a hit to their weekly income of between $60 and $120 per week. This is a massive difference for people who are on one of the lowest incomes in Australia, and with vulnerable children in those households. It was an extraordinary outcome. And of course, as you know, we have major concerns with the way the current federal budget proposals will, if they are all implemented, reduce to an even further reduction in the income support for those families. The other part of the structural problem is that, as we've heard, of course, we know that relative to many other developed countries in the globe, we weathered the GFC relatively well. The truth is that we have a significant challenge in the rising level of long-term unemployment. So what you see here is that with the red column there, 65% of people at any given time relying on income support on the unemployment payment have been locked out of paid work for over a year. And we also have a significant number of people, over 40%, who have not completed Year 12 education. So the corollary of the fact that overall we have fewer people relying on the unemployment payment is that the group of people who are relying on it are increasingly facing significant barriers to getting into the labour market. And the fact is that for every 10 people who are out there looking for paid work, we estimate there's only about one job available. So the idea that by cracking down, making people apply for 40 jobs a month, that a miracle will happen and somehow the jobs will appear and everybody who's been locked out of paid work for over a year and who doesn't have Year 12 education is going to get a job overnight is simply not the case. And this is where the voice of the OECD is very, very important. One of the strong messages from the OECD is education is everything. It's not, I don't believe, everything, but it's certainly vital that we have equitable, strong educational outcomes. And so I simply want to say again this afternoon that we must defend and promote and insist on the investment through the Gonski framework. And I also think we need to deeply question the way in which the federal government is framing the higher education policies, which we believe, and many of those who are experts in higher education show, that we will have a greater disparity and a locking out from good quality higher education for people from low socio-economic backgrounds. It's absolutely vital. That's our biggest investment as a nation, and we must do it. Importantly, also, I think we need to finally let go of the desire for front page on a Sunday when we talk about welfare reform, and to stop framing this as about people are lazy, and recognise that there is a major challenge for us in supporting people locked out of the labour market in getting into real jobs. And that's why, as I alluded to earlier this morning, we have invested heavily with employer groups where the real jobs are, with social services, all of our members who are daily on the ground trying to help people to get a break, to get back into the labour market, and with unions who have obviously a real interest in ensuring that there are decent jobs available for people, and what we believe are the strong policies that would work, really would work, as we try to open up more job opportunities generally, to make sure that people who are disadvantaged, the active participation strategy that the OECD talks about, is real. That is about case management. To the gentleman who talked about his brother who has an intellectual disability, it is about mentoring. It is about personal relationships. And that is the kind of activity that we have been promoting through our collaborative work with business, about better investment in local coordination between employers, new startup enterprises, those people that are looking for skills, and the kind of intensive education skills and mentoring and support, including in the workplace. The OECD gentleman this morning, he referred to a thing called Restart. Now, that's the one part of the federal government policy on labour force lifting participation rates that we really loved. What that means is that when an older person has been locked out of the labour market for a significant period of time, what the government will allow is for the income support payment for that person to be used as a wage subsidy. So it's a subsidised wage in a real workplace where people can get back into the workplace, build the confidence that inevitably comes from that, remember the relief of finally getting into a real job, so that you are, if you are continuing to have to be on the job search, you are applying from a real job, and you are not being stigmatised by putting in a work for the dole, activity for activity's sake, penalising you for the shame of having to rely on income support, which is why we believe all the evaluations of work for the dole show that it has far less success than what we are promoting with employers in terms of what needs to be done around active participation. I've got a couple of seconds maybe to talk about infrastructure. Certainly when you hear from the federal government about what it's doing about job creation, it will immediately go to where the Treasurer talked this morning about its major investment in infrastructure. Unprecedented, we are told. Well, we know from my work through the G20 and from those who have deep expertise in infrastructure development that it's not just a question of throwing money into it for us to get the kind of strong economic, social and environmental outcomes that must come from infrastructure. In the global debate, we know that corruption can be rife when you put big money on the table and you just open it up to a private sector. And that's why it's very important, as we set out on this path of looking with hope, that the investment in infrastructure will lead to real decent jobs, long-term sustainable jobs and better communities, that we have, we believe, not just government and private sector partnership, but also community partnership. We want to see governance arrangements which include representatives from the community. We want to see community investment plans that set targets for the kind of local jobs that should come out of this kind of investment. What will happen with Badgerys Creek? Will the jobs be there? Will we ensure that the community sector is not once again sitting on the outside complaining because of the failure to deliver, but we can do much better than that in having much stronger governance? And this is a real opportunity, and we've been calling on the government to really take this up, and it's a big policy push, including with the business groups going into the G20 process. I want to talk about tax because I think we watch an awful lot of American TV. And I think in the Australian environment, we still think that we can kind of have it both. We can kind of have the expectation about decent education, decent health, decent housing arrangements, but we can also just pay less tax. And the truth is, of course, that you can't have both. And if you listen to the public rhetoric, once again, you would still think that we are a high taxing country and the way to stimulate economic activity is just to ensure that business pays less tax, that we deregulate and business will get on and economic activity will thrive. Tax reform is absolutely vital. Australia is one of the lowest taxing countries in the OECD, the 5th lowest. And in the successive budgets, so this is on both sides of politics, what we have done is continued to believe that we could respond to community expectations around decent physical and social infrastructure, but also deliver 8 successive tax cuts. And if we hadn't had those tax cuts, we wouldn't be in the budget challenge that we are in today, because whilst ACOS doesn't agree that we are close to the banana republic, we do agree with the considered economists who say that we have a budget challenge, that if we stay with the current policy settings that we have, including on the tax front, we will not have the sustainable revenue base that we need to be the kind of country that I think we all aspire to be. When I talked about where the areas of real growth are, one of them is the retirement income system. And I think this is one area where, despite how politically hard it may be to revisit the age pension and to revisit the superannuation system, and recognising that with the changing demography of the electorate, every year that we leave it, it will become harder and harder to take something from people who have become accustomed to it. It is absolutely unforgivable that right now with our superannuation system, we've locked up over 1.6 trillion into the system, that we have 40 billion of lost tax revenue to the bottom line in order to provide tax concessions to people who are in the superannuation system, and almost 50% of the tax concessions are going to people in the top quintile of the country. We have been pushing for many years, and we joined in the Henry Tax Panel work on what needed to be done around superannuation. We were at the door of government in the lead up to this last budget saying to the Treasurer, if you are serious about what is the area of the age entitlement that probably does need to be over, this is one of the major areas that we must grapple with. And when you look at the final release of the Treasury modelling about the impact of the last federal budget, it is unacceptable that we would see that people on the lowest incomes are taking a hit to their bottom line of over $800 compared to just over $500 for people on higher incomes. The superannuation system has become one of the most investment-friendly environments that we have ever seen. And I do question whether, with the way in which the tax arrangements that are structured around superannuation, that wealthy retirees see it as one of their best areas for investment, that we have locked up so much of our capital in an environment which, by its nature, is low risk and low in terms of its profile. We do need, I think, to finally accept that we have created a monster with the superannuation system, which is not delivering on what we believe should be its core purpose, which is to ensure that everybody in Australia is not at risk of poverty in later life, and that it does reduce the pressure on the age pension. The superannuation system is not delivering on those core public policy purposes. So the time has come, we believe. Equally with the age pension, it is, we believe, deeply unfair that the only parts of reform that the federal government has been prepared to mention is a rise in the eligibility age for the full pension and a reduction in the indexation of the age pension. Now, both of those, as standalone policies, the only thing they will do, apart from save the government money, is mean that older people who have virtually nothing behind them will stagger on whilst they're on the unemployment payment until they get to 70, and then when they get there, they will have less in real terms that they are getting now. So we will see a rise in the level of poverty for people through their post-working age life, instead of what we had been pushing strongly for, which was to finally undo some of the very generous policy changes that were made about eligibility for the part pension, where right now you can fully own a principal home. It can be worth anything, millions, a lot. You can equally have over $1 million in investment assets and still be able to claim a part age pension, and therefore all of the rebates and concessions that go along with that. That is the area of the age of entitlement, which we again say when the Treasurer is asking for, well, if you don't like my budget savings that I've put on the table, what's your alternative plan? I hope I've been able to share with you some of our ideas of what an alternative plan would look like if we're committed to both economic growth and ensuring a reduction in poverty and inequality in Australia. Thanks.